Welcome to Flight Safety Connection TV, the new communication forum from ATR. My name is Christopher McGregor. I am the Flight Safety Officer for ATR, and I'll be hosting today's broadcast with my colleague Deborah Vintner, who leads our safety management system. In this first live broadcast, we will focus on flight crew training, in particular upset prevention and recovery training, threat and error management, and finally a discussion on how we manage flight crew training during the ongoing pandemic. Of course, in mentioning the pandemic, on behalf of all my colleagues in ATR, our thoughts are with everybody affected personally and professionally by this ongoing challenge. Indeed, professionally, we've all had to adapt our work practices. And today in the studio, for example, we are adapting to the health recommendations and rules given to us and respecting associated spacing and all the health protocols for all the team today in the studio. Of course, again, in reflection of the sad event which occurred last weekend, we again offer our condolences to the families affected by the recent accident. For many, it has been a tough 2020 and a tough start to this year. But from our perspective, this highlights the importance of staying connected and dedicated and remaining dedicated to flight safety. The purpose of this quarterly broadcast is to receive your questions and feedback and to stay connected. Where we can, we will be delighted to raise your topics live as we speak today and answer your questions as much as we can. This forum is for you, so we want to make this as interactive as possible. Indeed, today, if you escape from the full screen as you watch, you will see a field in which you can type your questions live. We commit to answer all questions and we look forward to all the feedback during this broadcast and after this broadcast. And we'd be very happy to adapt what we do to meet the needs of our operators and customers. But before we focus on today's topic on flight crew training, let me hand over to Deborah to present some of the highlights for ATR in 2020. Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
This has obviously been a difficult year for all of us, but there have been some bright spots. At the worst point, 300 ATRs were flying. Today, 70% of the fleet is back in the air, approximately 800 aircraft, and customer confidence is returning. And of course, freight operations continue to grow. So, as Chris said, a difficult year, but we continue and recover. In the last 18 months, 10 operators from South Korea to Scotland, from Ukraine to India, have joined the ATR family of 200 existing operators worldwide. Welcome to them. We would like to recognize the vital connectivity our customers provide. In 2020, this involved adapting passenger to freight operations, returning parked aircraft to service, and also transporting essential supplies. Another highlight was Air New Zealand starting RNPA R.3.3 operations, a great safety benefits when flying in challenging conditions, taking advantage of the latest navigation technologies. We hope other customers will follow and would be delighted to discuss this with you. And now we came to the end of the year and a huge milestone was reached with the first new ATR 72-600 freighter certification and delivery to FedEx. But let's come back to the focus of today's broadcast, With the impact of the pandemic, where are the existing and new safety threats? Let's focus today on flight crew training.
Thank you, Deborah. Let me introduce today's guests. Let me start with Captain Hervé Bart, who heads our flight crew training in ATR. Welcome, Hervé.
Thank you, Chris. I had the opportunity to meet most of the people connected today during the previous conferences. Now, with the context we know, it's a virtual meeting, different experience, but same pleasure.
Thank you, Hervé. And Captain Mathieu Olivier, welcome.
Thank you, Chris. I'm very happy to be here with you today. I've done half of my professional career doing flight tests. And lastly, I've flown the most beautiful aircraft in the world, for sure, the ATR.
Of course. Thank you. And Captain Jan Maestrom, welcome. TRI, TRE with ATR. Welcome.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Deborah. And thanks very much for having the training and checking department here.
Wonderful. So I will say thank you at the end, but I also want to appreciate your participation today. As Hervé says, normally we would do a flight safety conference. So this live event is a new experience for all of us. So again, welcome and thank you. Hervé, let me jump straight in and talk about upset prevention and recovery training. Can you briefly describe the development of the UPRT module in our full flight simulators?
Okay. First of all, I would like to remind that ATR was involved in the UPRT topic for many years. Involved in different workshops with ICAO, IATA, EASA. Involved with simulators and other aircraft manufacturers. Discussing and exchanging with the operators and other training partners in order to deeply understand the UPRT concept. Since day one, our main objective is to make sure that we are not heading to a negative training direction. This is why, for example, we rushing to validate a stall box without a real feedback from the aircraft operator before having the manufacturer input was not a good idea from our perspective. We, in ATR, we have launched a new flight campaign on the aircraft prototype. Flight test department worked with the engineering to provide a new flight envelope, more detailed, more accurate, especially in the corners of this envelope, to create a new data package for the simulators to make it more realistic than ever, even in the upset attitude. In parallel, we have worked on the training center on the learning objectives. Taking into account regulation, the airline needs, and using models such as CBTs, EBTs, we have developed the UPRT training syllabus.
Thank you, Hervé. And is this module equipped in all ATR simulators?
Yes, today all our simulators are equipped with the full UPRT data package with the validation from the EASA and or FAA. By the way, this data package, including the full stall, is available for any ATR simulator wishing to upgrade to the UPRT capability.
Okay. Could you briefly describe, again, we can open up to further discussion, but could you briefly describe for our audience the UPRT scenario that we exercise on the simulator?
Okay. The UPRT scenario is the opposite of flying the simulator or the aircraft upside down. UPRT training could be summarized in 4 points. The first one, probably the most important, is based on the prevention of the upset. Upset happens way before the loss of control. Identifying and recovering this undesired craft state leads to avoid the loss of control. Then the second point is about the extreme recovering training for a very uncomfortable situation. This is in the case the crew failed to monitor and got himself stuck into a real loss of control. Then the third point is about the iOS. iOS is the instructor interface into the simulator. So the new UPRT package providing a new page on the iOS, the UPRT page on the iOS gives the instructor a perfect ID, very clear picture of the crew response. Was it appropriate? For example, can we consider that the G forces applied on the control surfaces during a recovering maneuver was acceptable? And the last point is about the new SIM capabilities provided by this UPRT data package. Typically, in the past, when we wanted to train a crew to bounce landing, the instructor had to request the crew to voluntarily make mistakes, exceeding the approach speed, no flare at landings. And then the teaching objective was limited to demonstration. Today, with the new data package and the associated UPRT syllabus, we can create a full scenario, including a very realistic bounce landing, even using the startle effect to assess the crew decision and skill.
Thanks, Hervé. Thank you. I've heard in our discussions in the office and this morning this term undesired aircraft state. For the audience, could you expand on what we mean by undesired aircraft state?
Okay. As mentioned, the undesired craft state is not necessarily a loss of control. Drifting from the normal, the expected flight trajectory, attitude, or situation is already an upset. It must be detected by the crew and corrected applying a specific task or procedure in order to avoid a loss of control. Typical examples are speed decay or loss of performances.
And obviously we're focusing here on the exercise on the full flight simulator. From your experience and also in terms of ATR policy, what are the limitations in terms of using the simulator for upset prevention and recovery training?
Okay, yeah. I told you that UPRT is not about flying the simulator upside down. And by the way, you will never get the 2G forces or a negative G feeling in a standard simulator. But with the correct guidance for the instructor, you can easily meet the authority requirement and get the best value for the time spent in the sim.
Okay. Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Hervé. I really appreciate the feedback. I think we have a question. And I think, again, to the audience, we want to make this as interactive as possible. So we have received a question from Captain Ian Munro from Air New Zealand. His question, Hervé, if I can direct this to you. I wish to ask ATR if ATR recommends any Pacific full flight simulator-based profiles for demonstrating low-speed protection and complementary low-speed alerting logic.
Okay, well, thank you, Jan, and welcome. And I think it's a bit late in New Zealand already.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he's watching right now, but we'll see.
Okay, so yes, typically there is a new alarms provided by the standard 3. This is linked with the UPRT, but it's also part of the normal knowledge and training that we provide, for example, during the type rating. And there is a few alarm, speed, for example, or reduced speed, which are seen in the simulator because there is typical UPRT-oriented items providing the opportunity to see these alarms. And some other alarms, prot level, they are seen on a theoretical phase. That's during a briefing with the instructor, using mini trainers, and because we do not provide that in the sim, which could have a value of negative training. And by the way, within the OSD, it is not a mandatory to do it in the sim.
Okay, thank you, Hervé. And if Ian is watching and Ian wants to come back to further discuss, then please do so during the broadcast or the next broadcast this afternoon, or through our customer support teams, and we'll be very happy to follow up with Ian directly. Hervé, before we move on, I would like to just capture what I've perceived to be the key points with regards to upset prevention and recovery training, but I focus on this word prevention. I also would like to highlight that we recommend that every training organisation has the UPRT package, and this is a recommendation made to every operator, whether they come to ATR or go to other providers, to make sure that UPRT package is there.
Definitely, yes.
I focused as well on your comment this morning, it's not about flying the simulator upside down.
Definitely.
Which brings us to this phase. If I was to capture one thing from this morning, discussion on UPRT, it's undesired aircraft state. This is what we are trying to prevent, and the undesired aircraft state occurs before the loss of control. Is that a fair statement, a correct statement?
Definitely. I remember a typical comment from the trainee following the UPRT course we had is that they were very surprised at the feedback after the session. They were very surprised. They were not expecting these messages. They thought, well, they thought that they were going to use the simulator, like almost a toy or playing with the control. But most of them, all of them are very happy.
Okay, very good. An undesired aircraft state is a drift in altitude, is a drift from airspeed, is a drift from climb rate for what you've commanded or you perceived where the aircraft should be?
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you, Hervé. Thank you, Hervé.
Thank you,
Deborah.
Hervé and Chris. Let's now switch to the second theme, which is threat and error management. And I will turn to Mathieu and Johan. So could you please describe the concept of threat and error management? Johan, Mathieu, can you please give us some examples of your respective flight test and commercial careers?
I start?
You start, yes?
Okay.
Johan?
So, thanks, Deborah, first of all. It's a broad subject, of course, since it contains many underlying concepts, such as the human factors, CRM with its task sharing, crew communications, and so on. I think it's really good that you bring it up for different reasons. And one is just that it's good to touch on these subjects from time to time. Basically to bring it from the back of your head to the front of your head. It's also nice to see some different aspects and maybe see it from a different angle. But also TEM, the concept threat and error management, today it doesn't only involve the pilots like it was before. Today it basically involves everyone in aviation. Everyone from the CEO of the airline to the pilots still, of course, cabin crew, the planning department, engineering, ATC, and so on and so on and so on. So to turn it around a bit, can I ask you a question, Deborah?
Yes, of course.
Okay. So when do you think that threat and error management became the concept that we see in aviation today, and when did it become the diagnostic tool that we can see today? 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s?
So maybe around the 80s?
Around the 80s, mid-80s maybe? Chris, unprepared question. What do you think?
Well, we discussed before, mate, but I'm going to be sporting and say 1950s.
Thank you. That is sporty, so I can turn back to Deborah because she was closest. Actually, the official year is 1994, and it became after a joint study by the University of Texas and Delta Airlines in the States, where they had a good look at Delta's aircrew in regards to their CRM abilities and how they dealt with threat and errors, how they managed them. And after this, they could come up with a profile or a toolbox, let's say, and the concept was born. So 1994, I would say that's remarkably late, and I think you agree. And especially if you think of the fact that threats, errors, mistakes, risks, it's something that has been in the nature of humans and animals alike, if you will, since the beginning of time. We all have had to deal with these things, and we have done it without the concept. Now we have a concept. So if you have the DNA part and the concept part together, if we can combine them, we should have something really good. Not always though. So I want to take an example, and it's about me. I come home one late afternoon after work. I'm tired, I'm hungry, and I'm home alone. My wife and our young daughter, they're out at the moment. So I figure I make myself a sandwich. So I go to the kitchen, I bring out the kitchen knife, and I cut some nice pieces of French bread, put some ham, cheese, salami on. Then I leave the knife there on the kitchen counter, and I bring my sandwich to the telly for some relaxing time. Just a bit later, my wife and daughter arrives home. And immediately, even without taking her shoes off, my wife, she spots that knife in the kitchen. So she grabs it, she puts it back in the drawer where it belongs, and locks it up. So it's fairly clear that what she did was good threat and error management. A bigger question though is why did I not, especially as a professional trained in this, why did I not detect that knife as a threat? And I suppose there can be different reasons. And one, of course, I was tired, I was hungry, maybe a bit fatigued. It doesn't help, of course. But if we look at the threat was kind of a bit deceiving, since if I'm home alone, that knife is not going to hurt anyone sitting on the table. But later on, it's a different story. Yeah, so the conclusion I suppose we can draw from that, or I should draw from that, is I have to be more vigilant, I should have been more proactive, I should have understood that something like a knife could become something bad in the future if I don't do anything about it. And I think it goes for everyone. Luckily enough for me, we were two. My wife prevailed where I failed. But also I want to say that it's for me, from experience, I would say it's very important to create an environment for yourself and for others to promote a good working environment, for a good threat and error management working environment. That can be done in different ways. Sometimes it's just about buying some time. Let me take an example from aviation. So picture yourself, you have the ATR sitting on the gates during a short turnaround, a quick turnaround. First officer looks out his windows and he can see that the bags are arriving terribly late. It's only 5 minutes to block off. He can also see that the ground crew is working desperately hard to get that aircraft ready for departure. So first officer is not really happy with that. So he mentioned this to the captain, and captain immediately says, you know what, I think that could be a threat to us today. And together, the crew, they take a decision and to take a delay, 10-minute operational delay. Captain informs the dispatch, dispatch informs the ground crew that can now slow down to a normal working pace. they can stick to their SOPs, their standard operating procedures, and probably, hopefully, they are less tempted to cut any corners. So just to finalize, or to finish it off, if we believe that we have detected a threat, it's very important, even we're not sure, so it's very important that we discuss it with someone. And from there we can decide, was it true or false or whatever, it doesn't matter, and then we can act in accordingly.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Johan.
Thank you.
So I capture from your both examples that it's teamwork, and that it's not only in the cockpit, that it can be also with other activities, that it's a powerful tool outside of the flight deck as well.
Yes, definitely. In aviation and in other businesses, for sure, they're using it. ATC is using it a lot, and yeah, definitely. And in normal life.
It's exactly, I wanted to re-emphasize that point, which is where you started, Johan, that it's not just the flight deck. That threat and error management, it can be used all the way through the aviation system. And I think it's a very, very strong point that we'd want to emphasize this morning, which is part of our philosophy. And we've used this mantra a couple of times, from the repair station to the flight deck as this aviation system. Thank you.
For sure. Safety management system is one.
Exactly.
That's one of the tools we are using.
Thank you.
Mathieu, do you have an example from your flight test career?
Yes, Deborah, following Johan's example, let's take an example from the flight test environment. I remember I was the captain on the right seat of a C-130, an old C-130 from the French Air Force. We were about to take off for a flight test, for sure. On that day, it was maximum takeoff weight. And on the left seat, there was this flight test pilot, but unexperienced flight test pilot on the C-130. On that day, we, together as a team, we have identified two main threats. The first one was this unconventional crew composition with, as I said, an unexperienced C-130 pilot on the left seat. And the second threat we have identified was this bird hazard. There were a lot of birds on the platform on that day. Thus, in the end, there was a high potential for rejected takeoff in the case of bird strike during the takeoff roll. On top of this, if you had the fact that on the C-130 there is not only one rejected takeoff procedure but three, then you see that there is a high potential for error in the execution of a rejected takeoff. So in the threat and error management concept, we briefed, the crew briefing recalled the main key points and the main actions to be taken in case of rejected takeoff. The before takeoff briefing recalled the actions to be taken in case of bird strike during the takeoff roll. So we released the brakes, accelerated, and then we hit a flock of birds. I commanded a stop. And the aircraft was properly stopped just before the end of the runway. So we came back to the gate, and at that point we realized that an engine had been badly damaged. So that was the end of the mission. So on that day it worked. So what are the main points here? Remember, identify the threats. On that day, it was crew composition and bird hazard. Identify the potential for errors. On that day, it was a poor execution of the rejected takeoff procedure. And then manage them. So on that day, in a team spirit, we briefed all these threats and errors. And as I say, it worked.
Thank you, Matthew. So I think from all the examples that you gave, we can see that we can apply this concept either to simple cases, but as well in more sophisticated environment.
Yeah, definitely.
If we want to bring in the
we bring in
ATR experience.
Yeah, we receive. So Matthew, I'm going to stick with you, Matthew. We receive from time to time questions on crosswind landing technique, and I wanted to take the opportunity of this morning and the expertise to demystify. Could you give the audience, from your perspective, the golden rules with regards to managing a crosswind landing?
Yes, Chris. In fact, the crosswind landing story starts from the everyday landing technique, but without crosswind. If you add a few key elements to this baseline technique, then you will succeed safely and every day in crosswind landing conditions. Where does it start? It starts just before the descent. The crew has to make sure that the crosswind landing is briefed. Then fly a stabilized, crabbed approach at VAPP. From this stabilized and crabbed approach, remember three main points. The first one being just above 20 feet, decrab the aircraft. What is decrabbing the aircraft? Decrab the aircraft is apply a downwind rudder input in order to align the fuselage with the runway. At the same time, apply an into the wind aileron input. So this will result in a slightly banked aircraft. Mm-hmm. At 20 feet, flare the aircraft. So this is the second point, flare the aircraft. 20 feet, start to reduce the power levers down to flight idle, while pitching up the aircraft gently to flare the aircraft. At this point, do not try to perform a kiss landing. A firm landing is normal. Always look for a reduced air-to-ground transition. As a third point, the rollout. During the rollout, the main key element is always keep an into the wind aileron input and never relax this action into the wind. As I say, remember, brief the crosswind landing. Fly a stabilized and crabbed approach at VAPP. Decrab the aircraft. Flare the aircraft. And during the rollout, never relax your action, your aileron action into the wind. This will result in a safe and reproducible technique in the crosswind conditions.
I think it's an excellent way. Sorry, Johan, I'll let you come in a second. I was going to say that it's just, I wanted to repeat a phrase I heard right at the start, which was this comment: every time you follow this technique, it works, and you're safe. And I think It's a very strong message to demystify, because we do receive questions from time to time from our customers, and we want to produce and really encourage confidence in that technique, because it works. Clear. Johan, I want to bring you in now. I wanted to ask you the question. We can train for this on the full flight simulator?
Yes.
I'm going to ask you a bit more. I'm going to ask you to keep going and expand on the discussion.
All right. Yeah, of course. It's better to train it in the simulator, at least to start with, for sure. We can build the student or the candidate. We can build him up from normal landing techniques. We can back up 3 miles, land 3 miles, land. We can get the technique perfect. We can jump in ourselves, and I actually do that more and more with the new guys. I jump in the sim myself and I show them. For me, it works really, really well. Then they can copy my technique. The problem with that is that then they will get stuck with my technique for the rest of their life. But normally,
Matthew talked talked about the repeatability. I mean, it's this
exactly.
aspect, if we do this and we build up the confidence in the simulator with a young flight crew just starting,
you know,
it's achievable.
You start with little wind, then you're kicking some more wind, more wind until the aircraft looks like that. And then you really have to decrab, work hard to keep the profile and make it perfect. And then in the end, when they are comfortable with the max crosswind, we put some turbulence on and throw them around a little bit. And the simulator is a super good tool.
Again, for the audience, we encourage questions because we really want to demystify. I'm going to repeat that word. We really want to demystify this topic and give our flight crews all the confidence they need to operate our aircraft under crosswind conditions.
I think just one more point, Chris.
Please.
Just remember, everyone out there, because when I say max crosswind, I don't mean max demonstrated crosswind. I mean max crosswind for where you are.
For your operation.
For your operation and for you personally.
Okay.
If I have 50 hours, maybe it's not so good for me to go out in real life with 72 passengers and try to land this aircraft with max crosswind. So maybe I should have a few more hours before I do that. So I will step it up a little bit. First, we have the simulated part, and we have real life. And for me, even though aircraft is designed and we can do this, okay. But for me, I would set a little limit for myself. Or sometimes the airline, they choose to set this limit for the pilots, actually.
Of course.
Yeah.
By definition, and the recommendation is an airline should develop its own policy.
Definitely.
But again, this aspect of let's demystify and let's use the full flight simulator to its maximum potential and build confidence for the flight crew under these conditions.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks, Johan. Thanks, Mathieu, as well. Thank you.
Hervé?
Sorry.
Sorry.
Please, Hervé, sorry.
Just say a word about this. The question that you asked about the simulator capability to work on, to train on the crosswind technique. It all depends on the objective you're looking for. And typically there the simulator is perfect because you are not looking at that stage to what is the feeling of a crosswind landing. You are looking for the crew to be able to provide a very specific procedure. And this you can assess very easily in the simulator. And that will give confidence in the crew, and then, as mentioned, when you apply it on the aircraft, definitely it works.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hervé, I have a question following Mathieu. Mathieu mentioned the notion of briefing before landing in crosswind. In 2020, you were considering reviewing the training concept for briefings. Because from a human factors perspective, they can become repetitive. So how can we change this?
Yes, definitely. There is a debate about the briefing efficiency. The original idea remains relevant. Updating in a short-term memory a very few items and share with the other pilots. But with time, we have added more and more elements to this briefing. Result is now long, often boring, sometimes even confusing briefings, and the initial objectives are lost. Too many items to fit in the short-term memory, and the other crew member who might not listen, and then does not share properly the action plan. So that's why the idea is to think about a new type of briefing, which could be based on two pillars. First one, shorten the briefing to the very necessary items different from the other flights. Everything which is the as usual is part of the normal task of the pilot, the standard knowledge, the SOPs, and this should not be briefed before every flight. And the second pillar is let's try to have this briefing performed by the pilot monitoring. and of course, acknowledged and if necessary, corrected, updated by the pilot flying. With this option, the action plan is perfectly shared by both pilots.
Okay.
More than a recommendation today, this is an open discussion with everybody, and I'll be more than happy to get the people feedbacks.
Okay. So you propose to have this briefing performed by the pilot monitoring. Can you please expand on the importance of the role of the pilot monitoring?
Yes, this is something we have started to highlight for a few years now, making sure that the pilot monitoring is considered and used as a very active pilot. By the way, monitoring is a very active task. Of course, the pilot flying task is fundamental. To maintain at all time what is considered the number one golden rule, fly the aircraft. That short-term task to fly the attitude and the trajectory of the aircraft. But to come back to the pilot monitoring, he used to be the pilot non-flying with this negative connotation. So this has changed long ago to the pilot monitoring. But sometimes it still have this passive interpretation. So maybe it could be the right time to go another step ahead. Why not talking about the AP, not the autopilot, the active pilot? And if this is too strong compared to the pilot flying, or if we want to keep the pilot monitoring acronym, it could be called the pilot managing. But definitely, it is not only about monitoring and doing nothing. Johan, don't you think that sometimes, in some specific circumstances, the pilot monitoring is having a very active job?
Yeah, I definitely agree. When I'm pilot monitoring, it feels like I'm working harder than the other guy all the time. But if you take, for example, a flame out, especially an engine flame out during early on in the departure, the pilot monitoring will actually do more or less, I would say, everything except flying the aircraft. He has to monitor the pilot flying to make sure the flight path is good. He has to call out any deviations. He has to confirm the failure, check engine instruments for the dead engine, for the live engine, confirm the failure, and so on and so on. He's actually working quite a bit harder than so you're right, quite a bit harder than the pilot flying. He's really the active pilot. Pilot flying, okay, he's flying the aircraft, huh? Yeah,
And
so
sometimes under autopilot, huh?
yeah,
So
even
easier, huh, for him.
Yes, exactly. But also in other phases of flight, you have, for example, you're coming into a dense environment with heavy traffic, and there's a lot of radio going on, and maybe a little bit late on your approach briefing or something. So this needs to be done, everything needs to be set up in a hurry. At the same time, the pilot monitoring, working with the radio, monitoring the pilot flying. As a training captain, you feel this very strongly when you have someone that's not right on the ball, and where you're working pilot monitoring. It's actually much easier to be pilot flying as a training captain.
Okay, thank you.
It's a controversial statement. We look forward to the customer feedback as well.
What did I say? I forgot already what I said.
So if I can summarize, the term pilot monitoring could be reviewed to better reflect the volume of activity, and it would be indeed interesting to get the feedback from our customers to see what represents in their activities.
Just one point.
Yes.
I think it's very interesting what you're doing there, Erve. Honestly.
Thank you, Johan.
More
than happy you like it.
It'd be great to get feedback from all our customers on this aspect of active pilot or pilot managing. It's not really about the terminology, but it's the meaning behind the words. And that's something we'd love to start a debate on with our customers. Yeah. Hervé, I'd like to highlight one point for the discussion from investigations, and again, it's this aspect of always have someone flying the aircraft. And we've seen incidents in the past where both flight crew are absorbed trying to solve the problem. And I just wanted to emphasize that point, again, under your control, that we always have to have one individual flying the aircraft at all times. It's a very important point from our perspective.
Yes, definitely. You know what, Chris? Why
Please.
not making a link with the previous subject? We're talking about threat and error management. When the crew starts to experience a difficult situation with a complex failure, why not starting as a threat management, say, okay, let's make sure that for the next 10 minutes, there will be always someone flying the aircraft, and by the way, still someone else monitoring.
Absolutely.
Because we will have to deal with many things. That's a threat.
Yes.
And why not taking it as a TEM and managing, anticipating this threat, and by reviewing this little concept, and maybe you will not have the aircraft not be flying.
An extension of threat and error management, as you said. Yeah, we take that on board, and again, the feedback from our customers would be excellent on this.
Definitely.
As we develop our training, which is never static ourselves, we're always developing.
Absolutely.
And changing.
Absolutely.
Hervé, if we can, Deborah, I'd like to move on to the next topic, which was managing training during the pandemic. Hervé, so I'd like to come to you. It's been a challenge, of course, for many of our customers and many operators around the world to maintain their training regime. What would be our message today?
Okay. Sorry. We have to make sure that we can all come back to the normal training regime as soon as possible. All derogations and exemptions given by worldwide authorities during the COVID period were necessary to maintain a minimum of possible operation. These were often coming with alternative training, such as in-flight training or theoretical sessions, etc. We have to make sure today that we do not consider these alternative means as a new training standard. It is not acceptable that having an e-learning module or an in-flight training experience can replace a simulator session. Modern simulator, we have just talked about the UPRT data package. Simulator associated with scenarios elaborated with CBTs and EBTs model, all these are the result of 100 years of training experience. Let's make sure today that COVID does not give us a brainwash on top of other symptoms.
And I've written down in my notes here, Hervé, that it's 100 years of flight training experience, of which ATR's contributed 40 of those years.
That's exactly the point.
And we just don't throw that away. We keep growing,
Exactly.
But we need to come back to the standards which have been established. We're talking about the pandemic, Mathieu, in terms of our flight test operations. What practices have we put in to protect our employees?
Yes, first, Chris, in the ATR Flight Test Center, I would like to say that the flight operations are not necessarily representative of the company's operations.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, in ATR, we promote the basic everyday procedures in order not to contract the virus outside the aircraft. This is why we wear surgical masks at all times. We wash hands regularly, and we maintain social distance when we are working outside the aircraft. And then we have written our dedicated procedures for flight operations, which to me is a key point. I mean, any operator should think and write its own procedures regarding the spread of the COVID. This is why when it comes to flight operations, in the ATR flight test department, just before entering the aircraft, we make sure that the aircraft has been properly sanitized before entering it. Then we fly with surgical masks, and we operate the aircraft like this, as I said, in the flight test environment. Before leaving the aircraft, the pilots, they use approved disinfectant tissues to clean the aircraft before we leave it to the flight line, so that the flight line can work safely on the ground, and in the idea to avoid the spread of the virus. And up to now, it has worked, and we did not face any safety issue up to now.
Matthew, I want to highlight a point you've made, which is this is ATR's practices.
True.
And our flight test practices. It's not a case of ATR saying this is what you must do, but we do recommend our operators and our customers watching today put in place their own protocols. And we would be very happy to assist with that, but it's just a caution that this is what we do. Think about it for your operation. Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you, Matthew and Chris. We've got some questions from the audience. Okay.
So I think we'd received a question from Air India.
So I will read the question.
Ah, no, so for another one first. Okay, sorry, Deborah.
From Dinah from Tarum, from Dinah Isaila. Sometimes it is recommended to use CL takeoff 100% over for approach in turbulence conditions.
Yeah, 100% override for approach
Override,
in
yes.
turbulence conditions, yeah.
Would you recommend this for max crosswind landings?
Okay, well, this is this is a very common comment or question we have. Yes, definitely. Using the aircraft during the approach and then the landing, by using the 100% override is fully acceptable. And by the way, it's a good way to recover a little bit more of control, and it could be used on. I don't know if Johan.
I want to add something to that. So for me, this is me personally. Mm-hmm. When do I use it? When do I not? I have the option to use it whenever I want. Really, there's no limitations on that, from what I can remember.
No, there's not.
No. Exactly.
Just make sure maybe that it is used with the CL and not with the power management, which is something we see sometimes. We recommend to put the condition lever to 100%.
Okay. It's clear then for the crew that they are in 100%. Right. But a couple of points. So for a crosswind landing, let's say it's 35 knots steady from the right. I'm flying down like this. There's no turbulence. There will be turbulence, but this day it's no turbulence. So I would not use 100% override. There's no reason for me to do that. However, if it's like this, it doesn't matter if I have 35 knots from the right or if I have it in the nose, because if it's a lot of turbulence, or for example if it's a really hot day where you can have air pockets, maybe you get a big sink, then as Hervé said, it's more responsive. So immediately when you shove those power levers up, you have bite in the air. Mm-hmm. So it's much more responsive, and it goes both ways, forward and backwards. So when you go backwards, when you retard the power levers, the thrust will disappear, and or the torque will disappear, and you will land, which is what Matthew talked about earlier, which is a good thing. Huh? One thing though, if you're going to use this, don't let it go 1 year between the occasions. If you think that you're working in an environment where you will want to use this now and then, practice it now and then.
Practice it.
Yeah. Do it a couple of times a month at least. It's noisy for the pack, so we don't want to, for the passengers, so we don't want to do it too often, but definitely we shouldn't let it go 1 year and then go 100% because there is a difference in response.
I would like to add one thing on this question is if you think of this option, I mean selecting the 100% override. Well, as we said, it is possible. It's an option, but coming back to our first presentation, it needs to be briefed. If this option is considered, it has to be briefed
highlighting
before
the importance.
descending.
Yes, okay.
Definitely.
Before descent.
Yeah,
and if it is briefed, then it can be used in the
As a
team
normal,
spirit as a normal
procedure. Okay.
Yeah.
I take this question?
Yes.
So I believe it's from Captain Ramses. So if Captain Ramses is watching, wonderful and welcome from Wings Air. His question is, does the ATR have UPRT training for the trainer? They have since July 2019 their simulator equipped with standard 3 and UPRT capability. So do we do training for the trainer?
Okay. Yeah. So definitely yes. We by the way, we do insist for the airlines to go for the what we call the train the trainer version of the UPRT course. The objective is for every airline to get the knowledge, to have the competencies inside the airline, becoming autonomous, and then yes, definitely choosing the train the trainer concept, which is based on a very classic training concept that we use: act, observe, and then be supervised to make sure that everything is fine.
Thank you, Hervé. Thank you.
We have another question from Akash Parashar from Air India. So Akash had asked a question to ATR earlier about rudder trim position setting during landing. The response we gave was to keep it in the previously managed position, as was kept the yaw dumper. Will this practice affect controllability of the aircraft in case of an engine failure post-disengagement on the upwind side? We will take this question. Mathieu?
The controllability is not in question. In fact, in normal conditions, as soon as you disengage the yaw damper, if you're coming from, let's say, normal classical conditions, the controllability is not in question. You would always fly above minimum control speeds with a margin at every time. And so the trim position, classical trim position, when you disengage the yaw damper, will not affect the controllability.
Okay.
It's almost centered, huh?
It's almost centered.
Almost.
There could be a slight offset, yes.
A slide, very little. Nothing really.
Which does not affect the controllability,
No.
even in case of engine failure.
No.
Okay. Thank you, Mathieu.
And I believe we have time for another question. In accordance with COVID-19 rules, the volume of flight is by definition reduced as we go through this pandemic. Is the normal recurrent program sufficient for training? Hervé, I look to you, of course.
I would say, of course, not. Or yes, if it is for a pilot that did not stop flying during this period, but generally speaking, the idea is to assess the situation and update, readjust the volume of training to what is necessary for a pilot that have stopped operation for more or less long time in order to be comfortable in the aircraft. So it's I would say case by case, and that we have to readjust all the time because, well, unfortunately, even if we see the end of the tunnel, we are still in this context for many of us.
And we'd be happy to provide specific recommendations if they want to
Definitely
give us their timing, how they've been affected, what their flight schedule is going to be today and the future.
We have done the work for our pilots and we will be more than happy to share and discuss and exchange with everybody. Yes.
Thank
And
you.
Chris, yes, very quickly, do I have time?
You do very quickly. Yes, thanks, Johan.
Yeah, I just want to tag on to that. And I've just been in the simulator for 2 days. The last session was yesterday with an airline that has chosen to do 2 sessions before their check ride instead of 1. And number 1, for these guys, it was needed. They hadn't flown for more than 6 months, and they were, yeah, definitely it was needed. And yeah, it turned out very, very, very well in the end, because the second day you can see it's coming back, but the first day is not good enough. So
Right.
they've chosen to buy that option.
So
Good
by
example.
definition, we have to adapt.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. Everyone should really think about that.
Thank you, Matthew and Chris. We have received some questions that are coming on the screen. Okay, we have Captain Muwa from PIA who would like to know how ATR trains pilots on simulators for stall recovery.
So this comes back to our UPRT discussion,
discussion.
from
yes,
the start. Thank you.
definitely. Then this is referring to both the UPRT and also it's part of the basic training that we provide, I would say the type rating. So something very interesting is that when we talk about stall, once again, and I do repeat what has been said just before, we are not necessarily talking about losing the control of the aircraft, but we are talking about working hard to make sure that we will not lose the control, that we will recover before it's too late. So yes, we will work with the pilots at different stage of the stall, the very early stage, up to the very uncomfortable part of the stall. And this is, yes, typically the work that you can perform in a simulator, and especially if this simulator is fitted with the UPRT data package.
Hervé, if I can, but I speak under your control, of course. It's whenever I hear this aspect of training, stall recovery, I always have this the word prevention in my mind, and I'd want to re-emphasize the undesired aircraft state. So this training is valid, of course, but we don't want flight crews to be in the situation in the first place.
Definitely. I mean, if we would focus on having the last stage of the stall and helping the pilot to recover, we miss, I believe, the most important part, which is identifying that it can become a stall and then work on the early stage of the stall.
Okay. I'm keeping an eye on the screen as the questions come in. So we've received a question from TrueJet. Experiencing wind shear and recovery, what is the experience of the panel?
Experiencing wind shear.
Yeah.
Yep, you can.
I can go if
Go
you
ahead.
want.
Thank you, Matthew.
I have to admit I have not experienced any wind shear from the ATR. But from other experiences, I've seen them on other type of aircrafts, and I've always recovered safely. And I guess it's because the taught procedure has been applied correctly. So that comes to the training we've talked about just before. This is a great benefit of the simulator, the full flight simulator, is that it can train you to that kind of situation. And if you apply the procedures you've been trained for, then you will succeed. Like for crosswind landing, you will succeed. Normally.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. Definitely. And if I can add something on that, it's a very good example to show that the instructor needs to have the very good guidance and work on the proper objective that he's looking for. Within simulators, we have wind shear scenarios that you cannot recover. This is a mandatory by regulation, especially the FAA regulation, for example, and it has to be there. So if you use this scenario with the crew, well, you will only get a negative training effect.
Okay.
But playing with the scenario, gives the possibility to do exactly what you're looking for, which is what you said, Mathieu.
Yes.
Make sure that there is a proper procedure that is applied. Let's say you start the takeoff as the instructor, you give a strong wind shear to make sure that the identification is there. As soon as the crew starts to apply the correct procedure, you can maybe dim the intensity of that wind shear so that the procedure works well, and you get exactly what you're looking for, your objective. The crew has identified, he has performed the proper procedure, and he's got the learning that by applying the procedure, it works. He's confident in applying this procedure.
I feel it ties in very nicely to the threat and error management discussion and the briefings discussion, because by definition, if you're flying into weather which is suspect to wind shear, it's something that you can identify as well. I see the next question. I'm going to try and go through it. It's quite a few words, Deborah, so I'll take this one. Regarding crosswind landing, in case of high intense crosswinds causing a deep landing, is it recommended to reject the landing? Is the first aspect of this question from Azul.
Yeah, Chris, I like this question. Thank you for asking it. We've talked about upset recovery. We've talked about threat and error management, and this is the core subject. This question is all about this. In terms of threat and error management, the crosswind landing can be anticipated. Okay, and then when it comes to upset recovery, we can see here that a normal crosswind landing turns into more or less a nightmare because the wind intensity is increasing. You're talking, Captain, about a bounce landing, and then as soon as you identify that you are getting into an upset, that the aircraft is deviating from the normal path or the normal plan you had with the crew, then you switch from the normal world to another world, which can be, okay, I reject the landing and I apply the go-around procedure that I've been trained for in the simulator. So this is the core subject. Threat and error management and upset recovery. As soon as you detect that your aircraft is turning into an upset situation,
then undesired aircraft state.
Undesired aircraft state. Recover and change the world and apply the go-around procedure in that case.
I'm going to complete the question because the question was in several parts, so I'm just going to complete it. So it says, regarding crosswind landing, in case of high intense crosswinds causing a deep landing, is it recommended to reject the landing? So we've covered that aspect. It continues, how to perform this reject landing while the FCTM predicts this maneuver only for a high bounce recovery. So I think it's mixing a little bit the topic.
Yes, I think it's not really true that the FCTM is restricting the rejected landing to a one case. As you said, if you believe that the situation is different, then you better reject landing if you are about to land, or go around if you are still up in the air. But it cannot be restricted. It's not an exhaustive list.
Of course.
Every time you feel yourself in an undesired aircraft state, apply the recovering procedure. And if it takes to reject the landing, go around.
Thank you, Mathieu. Thank you, Hervé. I think we have time for one last question, Deborah.
We have Harold from EasyFly. How is the best way to simulate a bounce landing as a part of the undesired aircraft state during the simulator sessions?
I love this question, if I may. Why? Because I could just make a direct link to the to the training center. Actually, this is exactly what we are trying to promote within the training center, is to train the airlines, to train the instructor to know exactly how to use the wonderful UPRT data package into the simulator to make it a nice and realistic and achievable scenario which give results.
Thank you. Gentlemen, Deborah, I believe we've come to the end of the session. I want to again express my sincere appreciation for participating today. It's a new format, it's a new exercise for all of us. So, and I also want to thank the audience for the questions which have come in. And I repeat, we will answer and give feedback on everything which has come into us today. But I want to just say a big thank you to our panel. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us. Thanks.
So thank you. We've come to the end of this broadcast. Through direct contact with our customer support teams, ATR Active and the ATR Flight Safety website, we are dedicated to supporting the ATR fleet. As we enter this recovery phase, staying in touch is more important than ever. So the key messages from today's broadcast are: first, please ensure your UPRT training is in line with the industry and the ATR recommendations. Second, threat and error management is an excellent and powerful tool to support the flight crew. Third, we would greatly appreciate your thoughts and feedback on briefings and how to ensure their effectiveness. And fourth, return to a normal regime of training as soon as possible. So please continue to send in your questions and feedback. We will post the questions and the answers on the Flight Safety website, and we look forward to our next broadcast in April. We will shortly propose a theme and would be grateful if you could provide us with your feedback on the topics you'd like to address. On behalf of the ATR team, our thanks for watching today.